Strangers in a Van. The passengers of the van were all strangers to one another, yet they had all been invited to take a road trip together to a secluded and mysterious destination. Each of them was a notorious serial killer, and each of them had received an invitation from a mysterious host, promising a gathering of like-minded individuals. As they set off, each passenger kept a watchful eye on the others, suspecting that they were each other's prey. The driver, a hooded figure, refused to answer any questions about their route. The tension in the van was palpable, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the old vehicle. As the van drove deeper into the wilderness, the passengers started to notice that the trees and bushes on either side of the road seemed to be closing in. The driver refused to answer any questions about their route, and the passengers grew increasingly uneasy. The first to disappear was Mr. Black, a notorious serial killer who had been convicted of murdering more than 20 people. His seat was empty, and there was no trace of him in the van. The other passengers were initially relieved, suspecting that he had been eliminated by one of their own. But as the hours passed and more of their number disappeared, they began to realize that something was very wrong. Miss Scarlett, a young woman who had been convicted of poisoning her victims, was the next to vanish. She had been sitting next to Mr. Black, but there was no indication of a struggle and her seat was empty. The passengers were now in a state of panic as they realized that they were being picked off one by one. Colonel Mustard, a retired military man who had been convicted of multiple counts of murder, was the third to disappear. He had been sitting at the back of the van. There was no sign of a struggle. The passengers were now on edge, and they kept their weapons close at hand. As the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Mr. Green, a wealthy businessman who had been convicted of multiple counts of murder, began to act erratically. He claimed that he could hear voices in his head whispering to him. The other passengers suspected that he had gone mad, and they kept a close eye on him. Finally, the van came to a stop in a remote clearing. The driver, who had been silent throughout the journey, turned to the remaining passengers. "Welcome to my hunting ground," he said, as he pulled out a knife. The passengers realized too late that they had been lured into a trap and were now at the mercy of a serial killer themselves. They screamed and begged for their lives, but it was too late. The driver had been the mastermind behind the whole event, orchestrating the invitation and the road trip, manipulating them until they were all eliminated. The van drove off, forever disappearing into the darkness, with the screams of the stranded passengers echoing in the night. In the aftermath of the events, the police found the van abandoned in a remote area, with no sign of the passengers or the driver. It was assumed that they had all perished in the wilderness. However, the case remains unsolved, and the true identity of the driver and the fate of the passengers remains a mystery.